At my son's wedding I expected joy, I expected pride swelling in my chest as I watched him begin a new chapter of his life. Instead, what I felt was the sting of humiliation when his bride turned to the crowd, and with a laugh introduced me not as father, not as family, not even as someone to respect, but as just the old man. The words sliced sharper than a knife. I forced a smile, because everyone was watching, but inside a storm raged. If you want to hear more powerful twists like this, make sure to hit subscribe now and be part of the stories that keep you on edge. The music played softly, the lights shimmered across the room, and I sat still, my heart heavy. Her words echoed inside my skull. Old man, just the old man. I had raised him through sleepless nights, worked through years of struggle, carried him on my shoulders when he was too tired to walk. And now, in front of everyone, I was stripped down to nothing more than an afterthought. My son smiled nervously, not daring to correct her. The laughter of the guests rose like waves, crashing over me, drowning me in shame. But I did not move. I sat still at the edge of the table, observing every face, every smirk, every dismissive glance. I had grown used to being underestimated. People thought age meant weakness. They thought wrinkles meant irrelevance. But I knew something they didn't. A plan had been forming in my heart long before this day, a plan born not from bitterness, but from a promise to myself that no one would reduce me to nothing. As the ceremony dragged on, I watched my son and his bride dance. Their friends clapped and cheered. The air filled with the smell of roasted meats and sweet wines. Waiters carried trays, and laughter circled the hall. But all I could hear were her words, old man, just the old man. They burned like fire in my chest. My throat tightened with silence. But my eyes never left the stage. The moment would come, and when it did, every person in that room would see exactly who they had dismissed. The toasts began one by one. Family and friends took the microphone. Some shared memories, some told jokes. The laughter continued to rise, and with it, so did my resolve. When the microphone passed near my table, I knew it was my time. The bride looked toward me, her eyes narrowed in polite mockery. She expected me to mutter a few sentimental words, maybe stumble, maybe bore the crowd. She expected me to remain the old man. I stood slowly, my hands steady. My knees ached, but my voice did not quiver. I took the microphone, and for the first time that night the room fell silent. I let the pause stretch long enough for them to feel the weight of their underestimation. Every eye was on me. My son shifted uncomfortably. His bride held her smile, but I saw her jaw tighten. They thought I would give a speech of gratitude. They thought I would sit down again quietly, but I had waited long enough. I began not with bitterness, but with memory. I painted a picture of nights when my son was small, when storms rattled the windows, and he clung to my chest. I spoke of mornings when I carried him on my back to school, when my shoes had holes and my hands were rough with labor. I spoke of the pride I felt the first time he called me strong, the first time he said he wanted to be like me. I saw his face soften, but he said nothing. The crowd listened, leaning forward. They hadn't expected this. Then I shifted, my words sharpened. I told them how respect was not given by titles or appearances, but by sacrifice. I told them that a man is not measured by how young or old he looks, but by what he has endured and what he has given. I told them that anyone who could stand in this room today, enjoying this celebration without acknowledging the shoulders that carried them here, had forgotten the meaning of honor. The air grew heavy. I could hear only silence. The bride's face paled. I saw her hands fidget with the edge of her dress. She tried to hold her composure, but her smirk was gone. I reminded everyone that I was called just the old man, and I let the words drip like poison into the microphone, repeating them so they echoed around the hall. I told them that if being the old man meant being the one who sacrificed, the one who built the foundation, the one who endured hunger so another could eat, then I would proudly bear that title. But I also reminded them that the old man still held truths they had not yet seen. Gasps spread across the hall. My son shifted his gaze between me and his bride. The tension cracked through the air like thunder. The bride's family looked confused, whispering to each other, while the guests froze in stunned silence. I could feel the power returning to my chest. Each word I spoke was no longer just defense, it was justice long overdue. I told them that weddings are not built on vanity or titles, but on respect. I told them that anyone who mocks the roots of a tree should remember that without roots the tree cannot stand. The hall grew restless. Some nodded in agreement, others simply stared, unsure of how to react. I let the silence linger, then placed the microphone down slowly. My message was not finished, but the first blow had landed. The bride's smile was shattered. My son's eyes were clouded. The guests were restless, and for the first time that night, they no longer saw me as just the old man. They saw the storm that was only beginning. When I sat down, the silence lingered longer than the music dared to cover. The guests tried to return to their laughter, but it was thin, forced, brittle. The bride avoided my eyes, pretending to busy herself with her champagne glass. My son looked torn, caught between loyalty and fear of conflict. I had shaken the room, but I was not done. The truth was still waiting to surface. Do not just listen passively to stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe so you never miss the next twist. The dinner was served. Plates of steaming food arrived, waiters sliding quietly between tables. Yet every fork that touched porcelain felt strained. Every whisper of conversation was shadowed by my words. Some looked at me with quiet respect, others with irritation. I didn't care. I had been silent for too long, and silence is a prison I had just broken free from. As I cut into the meat on my plate, I watched my son. He laughed weakly at a joke from his best man, but his eyes flickered nervously back to me. I wondered if he felt shame, or was he too far gone, drowned in the approval of people around him. He had always cared too much about appearances. He wanted to be respected, wanted to belong. And yet in that hunger, he had allowed me to be belittled. I wondered if he even noticed what his bride had said, or if he had silently agreed. The bride leaned toward him, whispered something, and he nodded quickly. I caught the glance she threw at me, sharp as a blade, a challenge. She was daring me to stay silent, daring me to accept her insult as truth. I smiled back, but it was not a smile of surrender. It was the smile of a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The dancing resumed. The lights dimmed. Couples moved to the floor, swaying under the soft glow of chandeliers. My son and his bride took center stage. Everyone clapped, cheering for the new couple. But as I watched them move together, I saw not harmony. I saw cracks, tiny fractures in their union. My son looked at her with devotion, but she looked around at the guests, soaking in admiration, as though it was oxygen. She was not dancing with him. She was dancing with her own reflection. And then came the whispers. They were not meant for me, but I had ears that caught what others dismissed. One guest at the table behind me muttered about the bride's reputation, about nights out that stretched until dawn, about questionable company. Another snickered, saying she knew how to play men like instruments. I felt the fire grow inside me. My son had no idea. The guests laughed in hushed tones, but none of them dared to speak aloud what they all seemed to. No, I realized then that her words, her insult, had not been an accident. It had been a mask to keep me beneath her, so no one would look too closely at her. The evening stretched on. Speeches turned into gossip, gossip into murmurs. I listened quietly. My son moved from table to table, shaking hands, thanking people for coming. But his bride circled differently. She drifted to a group of young men, laughing too loudly, touching arms, lingering longer than necessary. People noticed, but looked away, pretending not to. I noticed, and I did not look away. My silence now was not weakness, it was calculation. Every movement, every word was being stored inside me for the moment I would rise again. As the night reached its height, the music quickened. The bride returned to my son's side, plastering affection onto her face. Her eyes darted around, scanning the room, ensuring every gesture was seen by someone else. It was not love, it was performance. I clenched my fist under the table, because I saw clearly now. She had married him not for devotion, but for stage lights, for admiration, for her own reflection. And in that reflection, I had no place. So she had erased me with words, just the old man. I thought of the sacrifices I had made to ensure this day could even happen. I thought of the hours of work, the missed meals, the backbreaking labor. I thought of the dreams I had buried just so my sons could rise higher And this was my repayment: silence, dismissal, shame. I looked at the microphone, still on its stand, waiting, glowing under the spotlight, as though calling me back. It would not be easy to rise again after what I had already said, but storms do not ask permission before they break. Then the bride's father stood. He raised his glass and spoke of honor, spoke of family, spoke of the union that would bring strength between their bloodline and ours. But every word he spoke was empty. I knew it. The guests nodded politely, but they were restless. I could feel it bubbling under the surface. They were waiting for something real, waiting for a spark that would turn their discomfort into flames. I realized that I was the one holding the match. When his speech ended, I rose again. The room hushed, this time not with surprise, but with expectation. My son looked at me, pleading silently not to cause a scene, but I had no more fear. A man who has been stripped to nothing cannot be threatened with loss. I took the microphone, and this time I did not speak softly. I spoke with the full weight of my chest. I told them that love built on vanity will crumble. I told them that respect cannot be demanded with titles, but must be earned with sacrifice. I told them that those who sneer at age forget that without age there is no wisdom, and without wisdom even beauty decays. I turned to the bride directly and repeated her words, just the old man, letting the crowd hear how they tasted, now sour, bitter, cruel. I told her that old men carry stories young hearts cannot yet imagine, and that the only reason this wedding even existed was because of the old man she dismissed. Gasps echoed across the hall. People shifted uneasily. Some clapped, others whispered. But I was not finished. I told them of the whispers. I had overheard the rumors that floated around the room like smoke. I did not accuse. I simply reminded everyone that when respect is absent, so is trust, and that a union without trust is nothing more than theater. My words cut deep. The bride froze, her smile collapsing entirely. Her eyes darted wildly, her mask crumbling under the weight of exposure. My son's face twisted, torn between denial and realization. He tried to interrupt, but my voice carried over him. I told him that I loved him, but love without truth is a cage, and I would not let him walk blindly into it. I told him that if he was to build a future, it must be on stone, not sand. The silence that followed was the silence of reckoning. The storm had broken, and the lightning was blinding. The hall was frozen. The bride's face drained of color. Her hands clutched the tablecloth as though it might anchor her to safety. My son stood beside her, eyes darting between us, his world unraveling in front of everyone. The guests leaned forward, caught between horror and fascination. I had torn the veil, and now there was no hiding. Stay with me until the end of this story, and remember to subscribe, so you never miss the next unforgettable twist. The bride tried to laugh, tried to brush my words off as nonsense, but her voice cracked and faltered. A ripple went through the guests. I saw in their faces not shock, but recognition. They already knew. They had known all along, but no one had dared to speak it aloud until now. My words had dragged the whispers into the light, and light is merciless. My son finally spoke, his voice shaking. He asked her if what I had said was true. His eyes pleaded for her denial, for her comfort, for anything that might steady him. But she could not meet his gaze. She stammered, said I was bitter, jealous, that I wanted to ruin his happiness. Her defense was weak, fragile, already broken. The guests whispered louder. Now some shook their heads, some stared at her with contempt, and in that moment I knew the battle was over. She had exposed herself. But revenge is not simply truth spoken, it is truth sharpened into a blade. So I lifted the microphone again and told them all what they had forgotten. I spoke of the sacrifices I had made for my son, of the hours and years I had poured into his future. I painted the picture of a father who bled so his child could rise higher. And then I let the silence linger before I said what cut deepest. He had forgotten me and chosen her instead, a woman who saw me as nothing but an old man. My words made him crumble. His shoulders sagged, his face contorted with grief. He realized that he had failed me even before she had. The bride snapped, then her voice rose shrill. She accused me of destroying the wedding, of embarrassing everyone. She turned to my son, shouting at him, demanding that he silence me. The crowd recoiled at her rage. It was no longer whispers. Now it was open disgust. Guests stood from their chairs, some walking out shaking their heads. Her own family looked away ashamed, and still she raged, until finally my son grabbed her wrist and told her to stop. His voice was firm. For the first time that night, he asked her one last time if the rumors were true. She froze, then her silence, answering louder than words. The room erupted. Gasps, claps, even laughter from some who had predicted this very moment. The mask had shattered entirely. She could not recover. She tore herself from him and stormed toward the exit, her dress dragging behind her like a tattered curtain. The wedding was broken, but it was not my shame, it was hers. My son collapsed into his chair, covering his face. I set down the microphone, and for the first time that night, I walked not as an old man, but as the weight of truth itself. I put my hand on his shoulder. I did not scold. I did not comfort. I only told him that a life built on lies will always collapse, and that he still had a chance to choose differently. He wept openly, the hall echoing with his sobs. The guests murmured about how they would never forget this night. They would speak of it for years, not as a wedding, but as the day truth stormed in uninvited and destroyed the performance. They looked at me differently, now not as just the old man, but as the man who had dared to speak. When everyone else stayed silent, respect had returned to me, but it was not applause I sought, it was justice. When I left the hall, the night air was cold and sharp. I breathed it in deeply. Every step I took felt lighter. I had carried the burden of silence for too long that night. I had set it down. My revenge had not been vengeance of cruelty. It had been vengeance of truth, and truth is the sharpest weapon of all. Days later, my son came to me. His face was gaunt, his voice quiet. He told me he had ended the marriage before it had begun. He apologized, not just for the wedding, but for every time he had let others speak over me, dismiss me, diminish me. He said he saw me clearly. Now I did not answer immediately. I only looked at him with tired eyes. He was my son, and though betrayal had cut deep, love still bound me to him. I told him that trust, once broken, takes time to heal, but I was willing if he was. The world forgot about the bride quickly. She vanished into the same shadows she had always played in, but my words that night lived on. They became a warning, a lesson, a story whispered from one person to the next. They reminded people that no matter how old a man may look, his strength lies not in youth, but in truth, and that truth spoken at the right moment can change everything. I had been introduced as just the old man, but I left as something else. I left as the storm that tore away the masks, as the father who would not be erased, as the voice that rose from silence and shattered the night. And that was enough. That was more than enough. If this story struck a chord with you, join me by subscribing so you never miss the next tale where truth finds its voice and silence is broken.